Welcome to the SoLoMo Show, a weekly podcast hosted by Corey O'Brien, the social media strategist at Heat and author of thefutureofads.com.
And I'm Adam Helway, CEO of the digital marketing agency Secret Sushi Creative.
Each episode, we discuss topics, trends, tactics, and tools related to social, local, and mobile marketing and advertising. Our goal is to give you the information you need to be a better marketer. Today is Tuesday, December 4th, 2012, and this is episode number 48.
In this episode, we're going to discuss how mobile is driving social media adoption, why WhatsApp is huge outside of the US, Urban Airship buying Tello to help brands create passbook passes, SoundCloud updates, Facebook photo syncing, whether the iPad is changing the way we shop, and much more. Buenos dias or buenos noches there, Corey. Time zone permitting again here for our last show, kind of from two different continents.
Yeah, you return from the future next week to bring us tales of future social media news.
Yeah, I'll have all kinds of cool, futuristic gadgets and technologies that I'll be able to bring back to my people there.
Nice. You're going to have the iPhone 7 and the iPad 12. It's going to be excellent. We're going to check all those out. Maybe do a little early review for the listeners there.
Yeah, interestingly enough, as you described there, the iPad somehow goes far beyond the iPhone's versions, which were released many years ahead of it in the future. So that'll be interesting as we discuss it during our next show.
There you go. We actually do have, which I kind of like, we have a story that's kind of exclusive to your trip. We're going to be taking a look at WhatsApp, which I had never heard of prior to all of the stories kind of emerging this week about Facebook potentially buying them. But you were saying that, you had hands-on experience during your trip, which I think that'll be fun to talk about. We do have some exclusive information that we were able to glean from your trip, which is very nice. But before we get into the news, let's dive into our quick update for the week, because it's coming up soon. So on December 11th, which is 1 week away, the SoLoMo Show will be at the Mobile Loco Conference. We talked about this last couple of episodes. Basically, the Mobile Loco Conference, it's part of the series of Loco conferences. We've actually reported live from Social Loco in the past, and they also do a Geo-Loco. So great series of events. You can find out more about it at mobileloco.net. And if you're in the San Francisco area and looking to join us at the event, you can actually use the code SoLoMo Show, all one word, SoLoMo Show, and that'll save you 25% off the cost of admission. So great one there. Definitely encourage you guys to check that out and come see what the Mobile Loco Conference is all about. All right, well, we're going to dive right into our infographic/stat of the week. This week it's kind of both because it is a report that came out of Nielsen, and along with the report, they always put out some interesting graphics and things. I wouldn't quite call it an infographic, but, it's got a little bit of both. So we'll go ahead and report on this for our infographic/stat of the week. And it's actually a report they put out called the Social Media Report 2012, Social Media Comes of Age. So essentially every year they do a state of the media, and this one specifically is on social media. They're looking broadly at social media. What are trends? What are numbers that they're seeing? And what can we look forward to next year? A ton of great stuff in this. So as always, we're going to encourage you guys to check out the link. It can be found in the show notes, and those are available at solomoshow.com. Because you're going to want to dig into this. You're going to want to find, all the numbers. It's great stuff for presentations and to just kind of get your own sense for it. But what we're going to try to do is hit on some of the top-level findings, maybe discuss some of the things that we thought were interesting, and see where that takes us. So, Adam, starting off broadly like that, is there anything that caught your eye specifically in this report that you thought, that is crazy? We've got to talk about that on this week's show.
I don't know about crazy, but I do think that that the numbers for Pinterest in all cases are really telling about how much of an impact that they are having across all of the platforms they're talking about. They're talking about desktop usage, mobile apps, and mobile web. And they talk about what the year-over-year change was from last year. And with Pinterest, they're, I don't know, about number 6 or so when they say, when they rank how many folks are actually using it on the desktop, but when they show the year-over-year change, and the year-over-year change for all of the platforms is over 1,000%. On the mobile web, it's 4,000% year-over-year from last year to now, which interestingly enough is it's a little awkward that it would be 4,000% on the mobile web, considering the fact that they've created actual mobile applications for both the iPad and the iPhone that have a much better experience than I remember when I've used the mobile web version, which wasn't really optimized for touch and such. But the moral of the story is Pinterest is just amongst all these skyrocketed in usage from last year, where it did exist. It wasn't that it wasn't on the map. It did exist. It's been around for a couple of years, but it's just enormous adoption over the last year in usage comparison to the last year to the year before.
Yeah, that one stood out to me as well. There was actually an interesting number, specifically because I was a little surprised by it. For me, Pinterest is better experienced on either a tablet or a full desktop website. Their actual mobile device, whether it's iPhone or Android, it's a little bit, I don't know, it's just not how I really think about Pinterest. It's more of a blog format versus seeing a lot of things at once and kind of browsing around to see what catches your eye. But they said of the total number of users that access Pinterest, if you look at the number of users that access it via their PC, more than 50% of that number are actually accessing it via the mobile web. So, 1/3 mobile web, 2/3 PC users for Pinterest, which is a very impressive split. There are a lot of folks apparently that, whether it's on the go or whether they're at home and just kind of lounging around, are browsing Pinterest via their mobile device and specifically on the mobile web. So that was an impressive number. And yeah, anytime you see, 1,000 or 1,600 or 4,000% year-over-year growth, that's definitely something to pay attention to. The thing that actually surprised me a little bit was Pinterest being higher than Tumblr, and actually Google Plus being higher than Tumblr.
Yeah.
The Google Plus one, I was a little suspect of that. They're saying that Google Plus, so we're talking specifically to the US here, and we'll just use the desktop visitors because that had more data. But they said that Google Plus had 26,000 unique US visitors, and then Tumblr came in slightly below that at 25,000, and Pinterest just slightly above it at 27,000. So all of those roughly in the same bucket. I was a little surprised by that, and I'd be interested to see how they got this data, whether that was self-reported data by Google themselves, or if they did a study and then extrapolated out. But I think that I would have expected Tumblr to be higher, and I would have expected Google Plus to be much lower. So kind of goes to show that you always can't go on your own intuition. You've got to look at the numbers and see what it actually ends up being. But Google Plus, still kind of trucking along and still getting plenty of use, apparently even higher than Tumblr. So that was interesting to see for sure.
I was also a little surprised to see that WordPress, and I would assume that when they talk WordPress, they're talking about WordPress.com, so that the actual third party hosted, the hosted version of it, versus when you grab WordPress and install it and customize and stuff to your liking, and that was also so much higher than Tumblr. In a way, just because of the viral nature of Tumblr, and how, especially over the last few months, we've been seeing an increase in attention on Tumblr itself.
Yeah, it does make me wonder if maybe they're just talking about people logging into the actual dashboard, so going to WordPress.com or going to Tumblr.com and kind of logging into their own account. Maybe people are accessing these sites via RSS or via various other methods, whether it's just typing directly in a URL for a Tumblr site. So I wonder if that throws the data off a little bit, but maybe we'll look at this next year and Tumblr will have had a massive growth and passed up some of these networks. But I think that was one that did kind of stand out. And jumping into some broader numbers, because there was also some interesting things just in terms of mass trends, in terms of desktop versus mobile usage. They said, and this was a study that looked specifically at social networking, so they actually looked at the total time spent on your PC and the total time spent on your mobile device, and what percentage of that is actually dedicated towards social networking. So of the total time spent on personal computers, an average user spends 20% of their time using social networks. But when you look at the mobile device and the total time spent, the percentage is actually 30%. So it's a pretty significant jump. 30% of the total time spent on a mobile device by the average user is spent on a social network. So it just goes to show that, the behavior of logging into your social network or checking your social network is strongly correlated with the mobile device. People get their phone out, they check things like Instagram, they check things like Pinterest and Facebook, and that's what people are going to. So, I think if your own marketing strategy relies heavily on social media, you've got to be thinking, how is this appearing in the mobile device? When you're building a Facebook app, can you access that via your mobile device? When you're sharing photos on Twitter, is it going to look good when somebody loads it up on their phone and not just on their PC? Because it seems like that behavior is a very large percentage of what people are using their mobile device for, and people are using their mobile device more and more, so that's a number you'd expect to trend upwards.
Yeah, completely agree. And like you said, it'll be really interesting to check back at what this looks like next year, because some of the players that I see that I think are getting either very little action or they've reduced just a tiny bit, like somebody like Facebook, who's really, really big, and they've got a negative 4% year over year here. I think we'll see some interesting shifts in those numbers next year.
The last number I wanted to call attention to, unless there was anything else that you wanted to specifically cover, was something that I thought was really interesting, and it was when they looked at simultaneous usage of Twitter and TV. And the percentage that they came up with, which was really surprising to me, though, I guess it makes sense, was that 33% of active Twitter users are tweeting about TV. So basically, 1 in 3 active Twitter users uses Twitter to talk about TV, whether it's the shows they're watching or what they're looking forward to on upcoming shows, that sort of thing. And that actually seemed really high to me. I was, somewhat surprised by the fact that TV obviously makes up a very large portion of what we're talking about on Twitter. And it made me think that maybe there's opportunities here for brands to kind of get involved in some of those conversations. And, specifically around relevant TV shows. So, if you're a fashion brand and you've got all these fashion shows online, getting involved in talking about those shows on Twitter is going to be something that's relevant to a large portion of your audience. You could even apply it a little more broadly. So I'm a fan of Boardwalk Empire, and there's a lot of politics and history and, finance and economics that goes into that show. So if you were a bank or a politician or, a museum, all sorts of different industries could kind of talk about that show or use that show as a way of driving conversation. And that conversation is more likely to be relevant to users because users already turn to Twitter to talk about shows. So it felt like maybe that's a underutilized tactic that I haven't seen a lot of brands do well, which is kind of integrating into that ongoing conversation about TV shows. Does that make sense to you, Adam? You think brands might have an opportunity there? Is that something that maybe that's a little tough for brands to walk that line and not go too far into the kind of gossipy side of Twitter?
Well, I think we've talked about this in the past, that one of the advantages of advertising on Twitter, so not specifically getting into the conversation, which I think is just fine as well, and it's great. That's the kind of organic part. But one of the advantages of doing, say, a sponsored tweet or some sort of ad on Twitter is the fact that you could do it quickly, and it's only 140 characters, and in a way kind of be more responsive to something that might be happening online at any given moment, and being there as part of that conversation with that ad. And so this may be one of those advantages. When a show is going to be on. Maybe if you do a little research, you might even know specifically what the content of that show will be, a bit more focused and around. And so you can be a part of that conversation with an advertisement, which will get a bit more visibility in the overall grand scheme when folks are watching that show. And if in the U.S., of course, we've got usually 3 times where the show's on due to time zones. And so you've got kind of like this large window where you might be able to utilize that advertising. So I think that that's an opportunity there on Twitter.
Yeah, that's a good point. I've actually got a colleague that's been playing around a little bit, just testing effectiveness and CPM rates and that sort of thing on Twitter. And I've actually been rather surprised by how effective the ads are in terms of driving clicks, but B, how cost effective they are. They're really, a lot lower cost per click than I would have expected, to the point where some of the tweets that he's been promoting have actually had a 5-cent cost per engagement. So for 5 cents, he's generating clicks and retweets and that sort of thing. So definitely something that brands could play around with. And if you're looking for something to talk about in order to promote and actually see, hey, do people retweet this and kind of engage with that post, maybe you do find something where you're talking about a TV show and you can promote that knowing that there is going to be this audience there. So definitely seems like an opportunity and something worth exploring if you can find a good connection between a popular TV show and your own brand.
Cool. So we got our main topic of the week today, or one of our main topics of the week that we're going to dive into, right?
Yeah, so word on the street is that WhatsApp is quite popular in the side of the world that you are currently inhabiting. And the other word on the street was that Facebook was going to be buying WhatsApp, but then turns out that's apparently rumor, though sometimes rumor turns into fact once all the PR clears, so we'll have to see how that all ends up. But essentially, WhatsApp is a kind of mobile communication application, and the rumor was that WhatsApp had gotten so popular that Facebook was going to acquire it, both as a way of getting users and just sort of building up their own communication system. But maybe you could give us a little bit of background on exactly what WhatsApp is, how people are using it, and why those of us in the U.S. maybe haven't heard of it while it continues to thrive outside of the U.S.
Sure. So the side of the world I'm in is in the Middle East, actually. So I'm visiting my dad's side of the family is from Lebanon, and so I'm over here visiting my grandparents and my grandmother, and some other family members, and I did some speaking and such out here. And so it was really going to be interesting for me because the last time I was here, the iPhone had just barely come out. Facebook was just gaining some steam. We're talking a little over 5 years ago. And in arriving here, it very quickly proved that WhatsApp was basically on par with Facebook in regards to usage in this country, and I noticed that in a lot of other kind of nearby countries as well. And in doing a little bit more research, even outside of this area, WhatsApp is really popular. And the application itself is initially, it seems like it's just basically a workaround SMS app, an app that allows you to text message other folks without having to worry about getting charged. But when you go beyond that, it's actually a little bit more. You can do things like attach audio notes to your messages. You can put photos on them. And what it does initially is it'll look inside your contact book when you first install the app, at least on the iOS, and I'm sure on the Android as well. And it will look through your contacts and see of those contacts which of them are also on WhatsApp, and basically create this big buddy list for you that says, well, these guys are all on WhatsApp. These are all people you're already connected with, and they're all there. And so in coming over here, and rather than using standard SMS, we just wanted to be able to message folks with Wi-Fi because we found out that many of our relatives were using it. And in adding it to my phone, I saw that tons of my friends and professional connections that were in my phone book were using WhatsApp. They all were already on there. They instantly show up, and it says that they're there if I want to talk with them or chat with them via SMS or send messages with them. The broader thing that I've seen over here is that when you go to a business, for instance, or there's a lot of small businesses around here, people who own shops and have their own businesses out and about. They will advertise just like many do in the U.S. with a little Facebook logo and the name of the company or the URL for the Facebook page. But you'll also see here and there that they'll actually have a WhatsApp logo, and they'll and it's not as frequent, but I have seen it out there. And any of the main mobile shops, WhatsApp is like one of the main things that they advertise. So on their window, they'll put all the social networks that you could access if you were to come over and buy a phone, and it's almost always this big green WhatsApp logo is one of the main ones, and Facebook there is right next to it. We don't see Twitter in most cases out there, and so it was apparent to me that in the U.S. we have SMS, you pay for it. Now AT&T specifically, and many of the other carriers have followed suit, allow you to pay for one big bucket of unlimited SMS messages now, and so a lot of that messaging we rely on that, and we rely on iMessages for many the iOS users who can use iMessage for free. But WhatsApp fills the gap for a lot of other folks because in other countries, mobile payment, like to the actual mobile plans are not the same. You go out and you just buy a card and you recharge that card whenever you want, and you don't have a contract when you want to have a mobile some mobile data and mobile minutes. And so WhatsApp kind of fills that gap of having this ongoing messaging platform that folks could use and rely on, no matter what phone they happen to be using at any given time, no matter what SIM card they're using, and it's kind of like always consistent in a way. What surprises me over all this kind of rumor of acquisition of WhatsApp is how it would overall fit in to a Facebook world, because Facebook has a messenger app itself, and there are some things that it has that are very similar to WhatsApp. And I know that they're primarily looking for, because WhatsApp has a user base that is very dedicated to it, but how would it fit into kind of a monetization strategy? How, could it be something that people could advertise on, and then how would people react to that sort of thing? What was your reaction from, kind of getting to know WhatsApp a little bit, Corey?
It did feel interesting in terms of a Facebook acquisition. It almost felt like if they were to acquire it, it would be more to protect themselves. I don't know if they'd shut it down necessarily, but I'd imagine instead of being one of those things where, oh, we've acquired it, we're now going to integrate it into our existing platform, and it's going to become the thing that powers Facebook messaging or whatever. I would imagine it would be more of a, we don't want this thing to kind of take us over, so we're just going to buy it, and if it becomes big, great, we own it. If it doesn't, great, we don't have to worry about it. It almost feels like Path to me when I started to dig into it, which is why it was interesting to learn that brands were kind of promoting their own account, because essentially you can form these little group chats, which is kind of like Path, where you've got a limited number of people that you can invite, and then you can do things like share photos and videos, and your actual chat messages are kind of like Twitter updates. So you've got Twitter, you've got photos and videos, you can actually share your location, so it's got a little bit of that Foursquare element built into it. And so when you add that all together, it's essentially its own little mini social network. It's not just a SMS replacement. It's not just a way for people to chat. It's really a way for people to keep up with one another and to, connect with friends, which is probably why Facebook felt threatened by it. It's like, well, if, really we all have hundreds or thousands of Facebook friends, but the number of people that you connect with and that you actually talk with on a daily basis is probably much smaller than that. You could probably fit them in a very small chat room. And so you can imagine, instead of loading up Facebook, you load up WhatsApp, you connect, you share your location, you share a cool photo you just took, and suddenly Facebook becomes much less relevant to you. So that part of it was interesting. In terms of how brands would actually use this, did it seem like they were connecting via SMS? Was that the idea that people would, so let's say I was, going to a restaurant, would I text them and say, hey, can I get a reservation for 7:00? And then they would text back and say, yes, you're on our books for a table for 2. Is that kind of how people were using it? Or what was the actual idea behind promoting your WhatsApp account for a business?
I think it's more of that communication thing. So whereas with Facebook, it's kind of like follow us and connect with us on our social network where we'll share things and that sort of thing. This was more like not a replacement, but a companion to what you would do if you were to list your phone number on your window and say, call us if you, wanted to order some food, or if you wanted to ask us a question, or, I think there was a car at one point out there that I saw that had, with a vinyl sticker across the hood, it had a WhatsApp logo and it had a phone number on it, which I assume was was the number that they had connected on their WhatsApp account. And I kind of jokingly said it was probably some guy who was who was, kind of saying like, if you're a girl, call me up. And somebody else said, well, no, that could be a taxi. It could be a cab, and I just didn't notice it. And they may be, saying like, contact us on WhatsApp if you want us to come pick you up. And so in your comparison with Facebook, I'd say I almost certainly wouldn't call it a social network, because sometimes, so on social networks, something like a Path or a Facebook is a place where you could put an update when you feel like there's something to update. Whereas WhatsApp is definitely intentional in regards to who it is that you choose to have a conversation with. It's a one-to-one and only a one-to-many when you decide to have a group conversation, just like you would have maybe a group SMS, which is far less, at least from my experience, it's far less often that you would use a platform to, message 5 people at once, because you obviously have to select how many people you do, 5 or 6 people, 10 people, whatever it is that you're messaging. If there's 3 or 4 of you that are trying to decide where you're going to go out to eat, maybe you'll utilize something for that. But in the cases that I've seen it, it's almost always a one-to-one messaging thing, just like SMS would be. So it's almost like strictly a communications tool, and you wouldn't just say post a photo for everybody to see, because not everybody would be able to see it. Only the folks that you specifically pick to send it to would end up seeing it. So while we're out here, for instance, my wife might go stay someplace else for the evening, and we don't have an international data plan here where we are. AT&T doesn't support it. If I would have been smarter, I would have just gone ahead and unlocked a phone and used that. But we used WhatsApp wherever there's Wi-Fi in order to say, maybe send a photo about what was going on at that moment. So her and I intentionally, in order to keep ourselves abreast of what's going on, would send that message and use that as a communication tool between our devices. And many of my relatives and so on out here were using it in the same way to communicate with me, to say, hey, how's it going? Do you want me to come pick you up so we can go hang out? And so that seems to be the most common use case. And I've actually seen some folks do things like take video clips off of their phones, where we might share something via YouTube specifically. A lot of folks take the things that they really enjoy, like photos, audio, and video clips, very small video clips, and download them directly onto their device. And then I've had a relative turn around and share those with me on WhatsApp. So again, it's really one-on-one, more intentional about who it is you want to communicate with, versus kind of just putting it out there and then letting people check out what you've been up to.
So in that case, it seems like the lesson for businesses would just be, make yourself available. And if something new emerges, if there is a trend and people start to use something like WhatsApp, maybe look at ways of making yourself available through that, and not just be limiting to, well, these are, the popular social networks in the US. This is the only thing I'm going to consider. Kind of just keep an eye out for something like WhatsApp that maybe gets an international fan base first and then slowly merges into the US, and suddenly you've got that same type of behavior going on here. Does that make sense? Or do you think, what would be the lesson that you'd take away from the international popularity of WhatsApp?
Yeah, I mean, I think you're right. I think you're completely right with that. I think I'd even say, rather than say waiting for it to come to the U.S. per se, is that if you are outside of the U.S. and if you already, if you are thinking about reaching out to outside of the U.S. in certain countries, to take a look and see where WhatsApp is really predominant, and not worrying about that as being part of your U.S. strategy at the moment. And if you look at, say, for instance, the Apple App Store, I think out of I forgot how many countries they said, but it was a huge chunk of the different, Apple has an app store for various countries. And so if you look at the top paid app, because it's 99 cents to get WhatsApp initially, across, I think it was something like 50 countries in the App Store, that WhatsApp was it. WhatsApp was the number one top paid app in the store, and it has been for some time. The app has been around for quite a while. So I think that that's telling that people think of it as very much an important utility on their phones. And again, we're only talking iOS. It's also available on Android devices too, which are widely popular in other countries.
And it's available on BlackBerry, Nokia S40, Symbian, and Windows Phone. I thought it was interesting to see some of these devices from long past that we've kind of ignored here in the US, but are still going strong abroad, especially the Nokia S40. I was like, wow, that is I haven't even, thought about Nokia in quite a while, but WhatsApp has an application for that. So interesting to just keep in mind that while the US is iPhone and Android land, that is not always the case internationally.
Yep.
All right, Adam. So as a follow-up to last week's story on Apple Passbook, there was some interesting news that kind of kept the Passbook news rolling this week, which is Urban Airship buying a company called Tello. I think it's pronounced like that, sort of a take on hello, Tello. And they did so in order to acquire their Pass Tools application. Pass Tools is an application that Tello had built in order to enable brands to create their own Passbook passes. And so Urban Airship being sort of the back end for all things mobile, they got their start in push notifications, but are slowly expanding out into things like Geo-Location and now Passbook. Saw this as an opportunity to pick up a solid platform while it was still young enough to be acquirable. I think Tello was only about 6 people, and so they brought them on, and it's now going to be a division within Urban Airship. But I thought this news definitely lended credibility to the idea that Passbook, and specifically passes for brands, are going to be kind of the gateway drug for iOS. There's a lot of brands out there that don't necessarily have the resources or the budget to build a full-fledged iOS application, but with something like Pass Tools, you could easily, through a monthly or a one-time fee, you could get yourself set up with an Apple Passbook Pass, and suddenly you're on the iPhone. You're a digital-friendly company. So I thought this was really interesting and worth sharing and maybe discussing if we see something like Pass Tools being useful, or if it feels like there's still enough hurdles that brands have to jump through that it's going to take a little while before, mom and pop shops can get up and running. What was your take on the news, Adam?
My take was, in addition to last week, I was really surprised to see how quickly folks out there have been creating platforms for for brands to create and manage their Passbook passes. I think to see an industry kind of being created around allowing folks to do so, it's kind of echoing the industry that's out there for folks to create very simple content-based mobile apps for iOS devices, and I think for other devices as well, but specifically those that say, pay $99 a month and we'll create a platform that allows you to have a content management system where you can add content to an application and do drag and drop this, that, and the other, and then and publish it directly back to your app, to the App Store, and people can download it. I think this is echoing that, except for it's very specifically, obviously, around Passbook passes. So I think this shows that people see a lot of promise in Passbook, and that the velocity of adoption, hopefully, or at least creation of Passbook options out there from vendors is going to be just increasing over the next year. Whether or not people are doing it correctly and whether or not it's going to be successful will kind of be something to check out. But I think it just adds some validity to the Passbook tool on the iOS devices.
In terms of potential, I thought there was a really interesting quote that Urban Airship had when they were announcing their acquisition of Tello. So I figured I'd read it because it had a lot of really great nuggets in here. So it said, "We are impressed with the vision of Apple's Passbook and think we can lend a significant hand in growing its impact. It has only taken a couple months for Passbook to gain significant adoption for a multitude of uses. We'd like to make it dead simple for any business to hop on board and be able to deliver living, breathing passes in the form of coupons, loyalty cards, or event tickets onto smartphones. Passes enable virtually any business to get into the mobile game as they figure out their long-term play." So a couple things that I wanted to draw attention to from that quote. First was the idea that virtually any business can get involved in the mobile game as they figure out their long-term play. That's sort of this idea that I was talking about of Passbook being kind of a gateway drug. If you've dabbled a little bit in mobile and thought, man, there's a lot going on here, I'm not quite sure what an application would look like, I'm not quite sure how to get up and running, this is sort of a way of dipping a toe in the water and saying, are people even going to bring in their iPhone when they come to my store? Do people feel comfortable interacting with their mobile device when it, when they're looking for shopping or for other types of experiences that my business could potentially satisfy. So felt interesting that even Urban Airship is acknowledging, hey, at some point you're probably going to want to get into a full-fledged mobile app, but before then, this could serve as a great way to test out mobile and iOS specifically. The other thing that caught my eye was the idea that it said we want to make it dead simple to create living, breathing passes. So again, Urban Airship being the backend for a lot of push notifications, their whole business is reliant on updating applications and sending out messages and using applications in iOS as more of a marketing tool where you don't just push out a game and you're done. You're pushing out an application that gets updates, it gets coupons, it gets specials, that type of thing. So I'm really interested to keep an eye on this and see what tools they create to enable these living, breathing passes and not just a static, here's my ID card that I use to get into the gym, but things like, sales and percent off coupons and events and that sort of thing that really have more of a immediacy to them, which I think is really interesting. So a lot going on here and definitely something to keep an eye on. And it'll also be interesting to see with something as big as Urban Airship acquiring a tool, whether other companies pick up their own passbook development shops or if there's merging. There's a lot of passbook development companies out there and they can't all survive at the same time. So it'll be interesting to see. I'd imagine this is going to be a rapidly evolving industry over the next couple of months, especially.
Yeah, and just kind of in relationship to the tool, one thing that I didn't see with some of the other tools out there, and I wasn't maybe digging far enough, is that one of the features that they offer with the tool to help you manage your passbook is also, they call it, in this case, they call it pass analytics. And so anytime that they offer analytics as part of something that could be really experimental at this point, it's a good thing because as it's new, you really want to understand what the impact is, and especially because most of these offerings are a month-to-month basis. So, for instance, if there's a free trial version, but really the best plan is going to start you at about $99 a month, and then move on from there. And so this is not something where you just simply create it and you move on and implement it. It will have an ongoing cost, and so you're going to want to at least be able to take a look at the analytics. So let it roll for 3, 4, 5, 6 months and take a look at those analytics and see the impact that it's having and understand how you might want to adjust things from there. And so I would say that any of the options that you look at, any of the companies that we've linked to, say for instance in our last show and this one with the pass tools, to take a look at the analytics and make sure that there's an analytics feature and offering and take advantage of that. It really, I think, is kind of a necessary bonus that or not even a necessary bonus. It's a necessary tool that you're going to need to have if you're going to try playing around with passes.
All right, Adam. So let's dive into our tool review of the week. And this week we're taking a look at SoundCloud, which recently relaunched. They had a thing called SoundCloud Next, which is apparently kind of a beta version of their upcoming SoundCloud. And now SoundCloud Next is just SoundCloud. They have rolled it out to all users. So a couple of interesting updates to this, and then we can talk about some of the implications. So SoundCloud Next includes the ability to repost sounds, very similar to retweeting. Basically, if you're a SoundCloud user and you hear something that you like, you can repost it onto your own account. You can also create sets, which are basically a collection of sounds. So instead of just listening to things and sharing individual sounds, you can actually collect them together, which I think is kind of interesting. We've seen, and I think we've even talked about services that allow you to gather things like tweets around a specific topic and turn it into something bigger. So the idea of users creating sets definitely has some potential. And then finally, they've got improved search and explore. So their goal is to really enable people to discover a lot more content and not just subscribe to a couple of specific SoundCloud accounts, but really discover other sounds that are being shared on the network and serve as sort of the conduit for that discovery. So I know, Adam, we talked about SoundCloud a little bit. Are you a frequent SoundCloud user? What's your thoughts on the network? Is it something that you've played around with and got some use out of?
I was a SoundCloud user early on, and I've dived in and out. Throughout the last couple of years that they've been around. I do consider them the top site when it comes to, it's like the top site in community and social application for audio, as far as I'm concerned. And it's nice to see that they're ever evolving here. I think, they've made comparisons that they are the YouTube of sounds. I don't know if they're necessarily there just yet, but I think the shift for the whole entire site based on this latest iteration is, initially it was kind of like, hey, it's me, where can I go ahead and put my sounds? Where can I put my music I might do? Where can I put some audio show that I have or whatever? And then the community really started to develop, and there were some patterns that started to blossom with the way that people were sharing sounds with each other and discovering music that each other was producing and those sorts of things. And I think that this new iteration of the community is trying really to focus on like just the whole feature of reposting, which is very much like a retweeting, for instance, right? Those sorts of features tell me that what it's trying to do is SoundCloud is trying to increase the opportunity for its users to discover music, and then the whole sets aspect of it is for the curation. And so now we've got a place where not only can people come and share their own work, but it's a place where people who have no work to share can come and actually become more curators and tastemakers of the other work that other people have on there, which I think opens up some interesting opportunities for brands to not only take advantage of the previous sort of dynamic, but now this new dynamic where, again, these tastemakers have control a little bit more over what they're doing on SoundCloud.
Yeah, it still feels to me, the idea of SoundCloud is always funny because they talk about sounds, but really when I dive into it, what they mean a lot of times is music. Sets feels like a music set, a concert where you're stringing together a bunch of different songs. Repost is kind of saying, hey, I heard this song, I liked it, I'm sharing it. So I always struggle a little bit to understand how SoundCloud could be useful outside of the music world. I guess, if you were a brand, you could use it to create kind of shorter podcast style content. We had looked into it for a longer podcast, and it gets expensive kind of quickly. So unless you're a big brand with big budgets, it feels like it might be a challenge to host a podcast style show on SoundCloud, but I guess the potential's there. It just always feels to me like a very natural fit for music and maybe a little bit more of a force fit for other types of brands. I'm willing to be proved wrong. I'd love to see some brands really dive in and get some great use out of SoundCloud, but from what I've seen, it definitely feels like a perfect fit for musicians and maybe a little bit more of a struggle for other types of industries. Would you agree with that, Adam?
So let's look at it this way. I'll propose a couple situations. So one is that if we talk about being on SoundCloud, right? It's like the same as saying we are when we do our YouTube videos of the show, that we're basically relying on people only on YouTube and the sort of community that's on YouTube.com to be looking at that content, versus the fact that we're actually leveraging the YouTube player in the places that we actually share our show. So whenever we want to share it on our Facebook page, we use the YouTube player because it's easy to do so. People are familiar with it. Or whenever we want to embed it into one of our blog posts every single week, that we do so in that fashion. And so in that sense, our audience is just being able to use that as a utility that they're familiar with, that has some social elements, and that has some good infrastructure behind it. And SoundCloud has that same dynamic where, because of the sort of player it has and everything, it's something where you can easily take those sounds and you can distribute it on your social platforms like Facebook and also embed into your blog very, very easily. So if you do have a show, it doesn't matter what the community is, even though I agree with you that the community seems to be primarily or more music centric than they are kind of just overall sound centric. So that would be one thing. And then the second thing that I would say would be that if you're a brand and you want to take advantage of a music-centric crowd, you might think of, like, for instance, I know there's a lot of music artists that go out and they put out maybe a cappella versions of their stuff in a way to welcome other folks to remix that content. But if you are a brand as well who find that you match well with a music-centric audience and you want to kind of dive into that place and say, look, we have a jingle that we want to create, or we have one of our very, very popular commercials that we want to allow you to remix as part of kind of a fun campaign and contest, then that would be, I think, a place that brands would definitely want to use it, and brands that don't have to be music artists in order to take advantage of it.
Good points, good ideas, and definitely something to consider. I think that, like I said, it's just my first instinct. I always think, oh, music. So I'm sure there are others out there that think the same. But I think some of the ideas that you shared are definitely thought-provoking and interesting and have some potential there. So it might be good for others who are listening in to consider at least checking out SoundCloud, checking out the updates they've made, and see if it's a good fit. One of the things, though, to keep an eye on is I was digging through the comment section of the blog post announcing the new SoundCloud, and there was a ton of negative feedback. And at first I was like, oh, maybe it's just, one or two, the vocal minority. But I dug through, and there were quite a lot of comments that were basically saying, bring back old SoundCloud, the new stuff is crap, where are all these features that I used to rely on, that sort of thing. So I'm not sure how, again, if that is just the vocal minority, but there may be some additional changes coming up in the next few weeks as SoundCloud responds to some of that criticism and tries to keep their early adopters and their heavy users happy. So at least something to be aware of, that this may not be the last change that SoundCloud makes in the next couple of months. So, but regardless, I think SoundCloud definitely emerging as a leader in the sound sharing space. Definitely worth checking out, and obviously they are continuing to improve upon their product. So if audio is in your marketing mix, I would say give SoundCloud a shot and see what they might be able to add to the efforts that you're working on.
Sure thing.
All right, Adam, you know what time it is then. The lightning round time.
Bum, bum, bum.
All right, 60 seconds on the clock, and since we talked about Passbook before, I figured maybe we would talk about another Passbook story that we've got going on. So, 60 seconds on the clock, ready and go. So what we're talking about here is a service called Visibility, which is putting business cards into Passbook. Interesting opportunity here. They basically said, Passbook is little cards. Business cards carry a little bit of information. What about if we just created a business card for Passbook? And from what I can tell, Visibility is a kind of profile generating tool. It's one of these social or mobile compatible info cards about yourself. So you can include things like phone numbers, email addresses, that sort of thing. And when it turns it into a Passbook, it's kind of digitizing that information and putting it on a QR code. The thing that feels a little weird is that because it is QR code based, you still have to have a way of scanning and transferring that information. So you still need something like a QR code reader built into the Visibility app. So it feels a little clunky, but at least there's some experimentation going on, and I always like to see that. All right, Adam, what is your take on Visibility's Passbook-enabled business cards? Ready and go.
Yeah, I think that there's a few hoops to still jump through in order to make this work, and this one I believe is still strictly for a chosen few folks that are using this particular vendor. I don't know. I think that the way that they're doing it with the whole QR codes and all that sort of thing, it's still not a smooth enough experience for folks at the moment. I think it'll be really interesting when maybe Apple tries to support standard business cards a little bit better, and what that really means when you have two people that have Passbook their own business cards, and how do they transfer it to each other. So I still don't think it's solved the issue that we've seen trying to be solved by folks that are doing NFC and the applications like Bump that are out there for the mobile platforms.
All right, good points, good points. All right, 60 seconds back on the clock. Ready and go. So Facebook announced a new feature this week, which is rather interesting. It's called Facebook Photo Syncing. And basically what this does is when you load up the Facebook mobile application, it scans through all of your recent photos and uploads them automatically to Facebook. It basically uploads every single mobile photo that you've taken into a private album. From there, the idea is it's a lot easier to publish those into a public album. And this is something that a couple of different services have done. I know that Android, I believe, does it. You can actually have this done with Dropbox, where you can sync your phone, and every time you take a new photo, it uploads it to Dropbox, that sort of thing. I see it definitely increasing the number of photos that people share. It's sort of, streamlining that whole process. Maybe there's the potential that it streamlines people taking photos and submitting them to brands, but it feels a little more consumer focused at this point in time. All right, Adam, what's your take on Facebook's photo syncing ability? Ready and go.
I agree with you that it's definitely much more consumer facing, and I'm not sure what the applications could be in regards to brands at the moment just yet. Google Plus is a place that this also is being done in the background with their application. I know every time I turn the app on, I suddenly see that they're telling me that a couple things have been uploaded from my photo album to a private photo album, which I have to keep remembering to turn off. I'm not necessarily a fan of it. I don't want to have all with the amount of photos that I take, I don't want them all to necessarily be pushed up all together. I don't want to have to curate and delete the ones I don't want. I'd rather just share what I do want. But there may be some folks out there that just really enjoy everything going up there all at once. But I don't necessarily think. I think this is more about just trying to compete against folks like Dropbox and Google Plus than it is being really convenient for the end user. I think that there's a small subset of folks that really would find this useful. I might be wrong, and I'd love to hear from our audience if I'm completely wrong on that point.
All right. Well, if you've got feedback for Adam, be sure to send it our way. All right, last lightning round story of the day with 60 seconds on the clock. Ready and go. So the debate here is the iPad changing the way we shop, or is the way we shop changing how we use iPad? And this was an interesting story written up by Forbes, basically about one of the writer's experiences during holiday shopping, noticing that as people are walking around, they're using their phone to do things like scan barcodes, compare prices online. And there was actually a study that was done that said the iPad represented 10% of all online holiday shopping, which is a very impressive number. But the difference between the smartphone and the iPad seemed to be pretty significant. So while you might not mind holding up a phone to scan a barcode, it feels a little more imposing to hold up your entire iPad and scan a barcode and do your shopping in the store versus, lounging around at home where maybe the iPad makes a little more sense. So I do feel like mobile and shopping is something that brands need to pay attention to, but I'm not quite sure mobile tablet usage is ready for the shopping spotlight. All right, Adam, 60 seconds on the clock. What's your take on iPad and mobile shopping? Ready and go.
I think this kind of goes to this multi-screen world that we're living in, where people are using certain devices for certain circumstances, and numbers have shown, things that we've gone over in the past have shown that folks are predominantly using their tablets at home when it comes to shopping, and they feel comfortable in doing so, looking at e-commerce websites or looking at something like a fab.com mobile app and such. And that the shopping sidearm is the smartphone when you're out and about. It is, like you said, more imposing to have a big tablet up, and even maybe socially inappropriate to be having this huge iPad out there. So I think this is showing that people are using different tools for different things, and they're going to probably own both of them, and they use the smartphone while they're out shopping, and then they use their tablet when they sit down at home and decide that they actually want to start spending moolah.
All right, good stuff, good stuff. A exciting lightning round, as always. Well, we covered a lot today, but as always, we would love to hear from you if you have any questions, topic suggestions, if you want to give feedback, or even if you just want to say hi. Maybe, give Adam a little piece of your mind about Facebook photo sharing and whether you think it's the future or not. And we definitely encourage that if that's the case. We would love to get to know you, our listeners, hear what you're thinking, hear what you want us to talk a little more about. So if that is your goal, there's a couple of ways to reach us. The first and probably easiest is via Twitter. We are both available at SoLoMo Show, or I'm available directly. I'm at Corey O'Brien.
And I'm at Secret Sushi. You could also email us. Both of us check that email frequently. The email is SoLoMo Show, SoLoMoshow, show, as in show, at gmail.com. You can also find us on Facebook. We have a Facebook page. We are also on Google+. And we have a brand account on Pinterest, which means we have a number of different boards that we have some of our content and things on. So feel free to go over there and repin to your heart's delight.
There you go. And all of the links that we discussed today, as well as the links that we just mentioned to our various social channels, can be found in the show notes, which are viewable either at solomoshow.com. Each episode gets its own post, and you can dig through all the show notes there. It's a great way to dig a little deeper into the topics that we cover, learn a little bit more. As always, there's a lot of things that maybe we don't get a chance to get to in each story because we only have a limited amount of time. So if a story piqued your interest, feel free to check out the show notes and see what else there is to learn about that story. If you don't want to go to solomoshow.com, the show notes should also be available in your podcast player of choice. So dig around, there should be an option to view show notes, and each episode includes it. So there's a lot there. Sometimes there's even additional links that we don't get a chance to cover, but that provide some more background material. So definitely encourage you to check out the show notes because there is often some valuable tidbits hidden inside of there that you could use to further enlighten yourself on the topics that we cover each week. And if we had one request, it would be that you rate us in iTunes. It's a small gesture, but it really helps others discover the show. It helps us appear in things like the featured podcast area. So search for the SoLoMo Show inside of iTunes, give it a quick rating, write up a quick review, and it would be probably the easiest and best way for you to give back to the show. So if you appreciate the time that we put into creating the show each week, the best way to show that is to rate the show inside of iTunes. And with that, we will call this episode a wrap, and we hope that you join us next week for another great episode of the SoLoMo Show.
Take care.